All right. Thank you, Rachel. And good morning to everybody. I know it's a Monday morning, but it's good to see that most of you are coming in with some energy this morning to discuss equity in education and talking about a qualitative understanding. So I'm Ruby Stevens Morgan. I'm the Director of Strategic Planning and Analysis with the Coordinating Board. I've been with the Coordinating Board for 8 months. I came to Coordinating Board from Prairie View A&M University as the Director of Institutional Research for almost 9 years. And I've worked in K through 12 administration as a classroom teacher in K through 12, as well as higher education. So, and I've worked with data for several years. So I understand a lot of the challenges that we face in education from different perspectives, and knowing that equity is an important part of that. We've used our grant from the Lumina Foundation to do some work at the Coordinating Board with some of the staff, and we wanted to share some of that work with you all because we know that it's definitely relevant in the institutions, and we want to be able to continue to advance that work so that we can start to lead by example and share some of our knowledge with you. So with that said, I'm going to introduce a couple of people from the Coordinating Board before we get started in the discussion. So first is Elizabeth, and she will introduce herself. She did all of the communications with you all, the invitations, so you all may know her already, and if not, you definitely recognize the name. So Elizabeth.
Good morning, everyone. So as Ruby said, I'm Elizabeth Shivers. I have been with the Coordinating Board for about 1.5 years, a little more than that at this point. Before that, I was at one of our Texas community colleges for about 4.5 years. So I have experience in higher ed on both the institutional side and the state side here in Texas. And I've been in higher ed for quite a long time beyond that. So I'm excited to have our training today. Basically, just quick, how our day is going to work is Rachel is going to walk us through an equity training, and we're going to have lots of discussion during that. And then that's going to be followed by Luis and I are going to introduce our dashboards. We have created some regional dashboards using Tableau, and we would like to introduce those to you and get some feedback from you today. And then we will have some discussion and some opportunity for you to ask any questions you may have related to the regional work. So with that, I hope everybody's excited. I'm looking forward to a good session. Thanks.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And the next that Elizabeth just mentioned, Luis would just say hello. You'll talk to him more later and he'll present the dashboards. But for now, just wanted him to introduce himself to you.
Hey, everyone in the Upper East. I hope you're doing well on this Monday morning. I'm going to be coming to you around the 11 o'clock hour to show you a little bit about the dashboards and how to start to use them. So I'm excited to do that. So looking forward to it.
Thank you, Luis. And also from the Coordinating Board is John Denning, who's the point of contact for your region. Most of you probably know him already, but just wanted to give him a chance to say hello.
Hello, everybody. It's good to see you again.
All right. Thank you, John. And I think that's it for the Coordinating Board people that would that are on board. I see we have Leslie Hall from the Coordinating Board. I don't know if she'd like to say something. If so, that would be great, but if not, that's okay too. Leslie?
Hi, I'm happy to be here with you today. I'm really just observing, so I appreciate you letting me sit in. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Leslie. Okay, so with that said, we will go ahead and get ready to get started. And as Elizabeth mentioned, we will do the equity with the qualitative understandings first, and then we'll do introduce the dashboards and have some Q&A and answer some questions. So with that said, I will put you in the hands of Rachel, who will start the equity and education training.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Ruby, for introducing me and for the Coordinating Board having me today present on equity in education towards qualitative understanding. So we're moving from quant to qual. I want to name two things. First, my lovely boss, Larkin Tackett, is here, the CEO and founder of Maya Consulting. And he is going to be really observing and by proxy participating, because if you're observing today's session, you're also participating in today's session. So he'll be observing my facilitation and participating as well. I'm going to go ahead and pause here and take a breath. And I want to acknowledge what is going on both in this space and outside of that space, and that is the continuous murder of Black men, Black women, Black children in this country. You know, just over the weekend, we received more news of somebody being murdered by the police. And that is very, very heavy news. It is constant, and it's with us in the back of our mind constantly. And so I just want to name that as a facilitator, as an equity facilitator, that that's with us and it's coming with us today, and that it's okay to not be okay. The frustrations, the anger, the grief, the sadness, the confusion, everything, all of the above, bring it to today's session. This is the space and the place to unpack that. So I'm going to name that. We'll take one more breath just to transition. Let's go ahead and get started. First things first, I would like for you to create your name tag. Names are a super big signifier for us in our learning sessions. And so I want to know who is with us today and who is interacting in today's session. So you can do this two ways. First, you can go to your bar at the bottom of your page or the top of your page and click participants. Then click more next to your name and click rename. And I want you to rename yourself with either your first and last name or your first name and last name initial. And it looks like every single one of us, with the exception of a few, have already done this, which is great. Go ahead and rename yourself. So it looks like we have Tina and Pamela, thank you. Kevin, Chris, awesome job. R. Clinton at NTCC.edu, do you need any help renaming yourself? Go ahead and take yourself.
Yes, actually I do. And I'm not sure exactly which, yeah.
That's okay, I can do it for you. Tell me your first name.
First name is Ron.
Thank you, Ron. Last name is Clinton, I'm assuming?
That's correct.
Awesome. I'll name you Ron Clinton. How about that?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Cool. Good deal. Now that we have our name tags done, I will be able to cold call you. So get ready. You might already start to feel that iciness under your seat. So I would love for Kevin, if you could unmute yourself. Kevin, can you read today's agenda for us?
I can.
Thank you, sir.
I believe I can. We're gonna give it a shot. So to begin with, we're going to have this welcome and acknowledgement. Secondly, we'll follow up with community agreements and why did you come today as point number 3. Point number 4, why are we here? Followed by 5. Objectives, our role working toward equity in education, then some feedback and Q&A.
Lovely job, Kevin. Thank you for being our first cold call. That really starts us off right. Are there any questions so far? If you've got a question, give me a thumbs up, unmute yourself and ask it. If not, we'll just move on. And it looks like I don't see anybody who has questions, so we're gonna go ahead and move on here. First things first, we have some Zoom learning agreements. The virtual learning space is is both similar and different to our in-person learning space, but just like in person, I want to make sure our attendance is all in. So you have chosen to be here today and to participate. Just like in person, if you have an interruption or if you have a need that you need to take care of, just jump in the chat and let me know privately, or everyone, hey, I'm going to step out, but I'll be back. Or, you know, whatever it may be, just let me know. Next, engagement. I am asking that you be all in. So often in these virtual learning spaces, it is really tempting to take ourselves off video and start checking email, start attending to a kid in the other room, you know, whatever it may be. But I'm gonna ask that you be all in. It's my assumption that the more you participate, the more you dialogue with your colleagues, the more you're gonna get out of this session. I'm also gonna ask that you stay muted during today's session. That way we don't have any surprises or interruptions, which has happened before. I've gotten distracted by our participants, so please stay on mute. I'm also gonna ask that we all have our cameras on. It's so important that me as a facilitator be able to see all of those little micro moves that are going on with you. So please, I'm gonna ask that you keep your camera on, and we'll practice here. I'm gonna go ahead and ask every single one of us to take ourselves off camera. So go ahead and press stop video for a moment. Looks like John is off video, Larkin is off video, Kevin is off video, great. And now I just want us to all in 100%, bring yourself back. Start your video again. Great, oh, I see some new folks. Hello, welcome. Awesome. Chris, I hope you can join us on video. Chris D. Afton, I hope you can join us too on video. Great, good to see everyone. We are also going to be using chat quite a bit, but this group, Upper East Texas, has already got it together. We're gonna stay off chat unless I ask us to use chat. So you'll hear me a couple of times say, respond to this question in chat, either privately or to everyone. Those are the times that we'll be using chat. It's really hard for me to monitor chat while I'm facilitating, and I've got a couple of co-hosts from the coordinating board, but only use chat when prompted. Awesome. So right now we're gonna practice. I want you to tell me one word that you are feeling about today's session. Describe in one word how you're feeling about today's session in the chat, either chat me privately or chat everyone. I'm feeling nervous. Chris says, okay, thank you. Larkin says excited, awesome. Kevin's interested, Leslie is interested, good job. Elizabeth says timely. Thank you, Ron, for the note. I really appreciate it. Ruby says hopeful. I'm feeling interested. Thank you, Afton. So there's a note here. If you're going to chat me privately, I will 100% do my best to not say what you chatted me privately out loud. I appreciate the engagement, and anonymous engagement is really important to me. So good deal. I am now going to go ahead and cold call Kelly. Kelly, can you tell me what you mean by good?
Well, I just have a good feeling about what I'm going to learn from this and how I can better serve students from an equity standpoint.
Nice, thank you, Kelly. I like that Kelly said, I'm just feeling good about what I'm about to learn. That really inspires me as the facilitator. You're already trusting me in this work. I appreciate that, Kelly. Good deal. So you'll see that I'm going to be using cold call quite a bit. That's in order to keep us moving along, but also to increase your engagement as a participant. So be ready for cold call. And I got a couple of notes here with a couple individual needs. So thank you for letting me know. Good deal. So here are today's learning agreements. We have our Zoom agreements. These are our learning agreements. We are going to be using I statements today. And what I mean by that is we're going to be speaking from our own individual perspectives. I can only speak on what's true for me. I cannot speak on what's true for every Mexican American, right? I can only speak from my Mexican American experience. And I can only speak on my experience as a woman. I can't speak on behalf of all women. So I'm going to ask that you speak from your individual experience. We're going to get into the why on that a little bit later, but please use I statements. Also, I want us to own the impact of our statements. So oftentimes when we're in difficult conversations, especially about issues of identity, race, gender, ethnicity, sexuality, oftentimes we can get into a place where we're owning our intention. And when we say something that is a little bit, I guess whenever we say something that doesn't land well with another person, we'll say, well, that wasn't my intention. But really what we should be doing is owning the impact of our actions and of our statements. So today we'll also be focusing on owning our impact. That's especially true when we get into institutional accountability and self-accountability later. I also want us to be seeking to understand as we're speaking from our own experiences. Our colleagues are also going to be speaking from their experiences. And it's super important in our own learning that when they're speaking from their own experiences, that we pause, turn off that dialogue that's going on in our head, and just seek to understand where they're coming from. Seeking to understand is one of those big places where we're accessing empathy, and we can start to really enter into a place of curiosity and learning. Finally, my favorite learning agreement: accept and expect non-closure. I think oftentimes we walk into a professional development space expecting that we are going to get many answers and we're going to be able to implement those answers immediately. You should expect that you are not going to receive all the answers today. Not from me, not from yourself, and not from each other. You'll get a start of some answers, but later on, more questions, more answers will be coming. There also might be some interactions that just leave you with a feeling of wanting more. That's again where you should expect and accept non-closure. So I want you to think through these learning agreements. Choose one you are going to prioritize. You might be writing it down. You might just lock it into your head, but choose one learning agreement you are going to focus on today. And I'm going to send you into breakout rooms. And I want you to discuss with one other person in your breakout room, which learning agreement are you going to prioritize today? I'll go ahead and send you off, and you have 2 minutes to discuss which learning agreement are you going to prioritize. Welcome back, y'all. Okay, Chris D, if you could unmute yourself. I'd love to hear about which learning agreement you are planning to prioritize today.
I was planning on prioritizing Seek to Understand, and my fellow participant, Afton, she also chose that one. Sorry, Afton, I hope you didn't mind.
I like that you also shared Afton's because I was actually going to ask you to do that, but I also appreciate that like marker of consent too, Chris. Tell me more about why you were prioritizing Seeking to Understand.
Okay, I like to believe that I already accept my statements, so I wasn't going to choose that one. And I just feel that Seeking to Understand is something I could probably work more on.
Gotcha. Okay, I appreciate that vulnerability, but it's in it may be a growth area for you. Thank you, Chris. So we each are going to be prioritizing something different, and I hope that we keep that on top of mind, or keep it top of mind through today's learning. So I've got 2 questions here, and I want you to answer one of these questions in the chat. And please answer it privately if you feel like you need to answer it privately, but also don't be afraid to share your answer with everyone. Why are you here with us today? What do you hope to get out of today? You know, we're starting fresh here. So tell me your hopes. How can I pivot this session to meet those needs? Go ahead and respond to one of 2 of these questions in the chat, either to everyone or to me privately. Thank you, Afton. I appreciate your honesty. Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Chris. I absolutely see today's work as connecting to that. Ron says to everyone, we are interested in to prove how we address equity issues on our campus. We will definitely start that work today. Thank you, Ron. Lovely, thank you. I've got a lot of really, really good responses that were sent to me privately. I so appreciate that anonymous participation. Thank you, folks. Ruby, I hope to learn how the coordinating board staff may support institutions in their equity work. Absolutely. This session is brought to us by the coordinating board. And so the learnings that we have today, let's put them back on the coordinating board. A lot of our work also extends to our partnership and our relationship with the coordinating board. So let's put our learnings back on them. Absolutely. Thank you, Ruby. Kevin, information and strategies that can broadly impact our campus. You will be getting some strategies today. Leslie, critical topic to address always. Oh, well, thank you, Leslie. I appreciate that compliment there. I hope that I can bring some online facilitation tips and tricks today. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into where I'm coming from, and I want to share with you a bit about, looks like I got a couple more chats coming in. Thank you, Larkin. And thank you, John. Love it. Cool. So as I said, I'm going to share a little bit of, from my perspective, why we're here today. So we are really here today to start a conversation. This is just a start of a conversation for each region on applying an equity lens to our leadership. So we're going to be working on applying an equity lens really through a qualitative understanding. We'll get to that in a bit, to the work that we're doing on campuses already. And the way we're going to do that is by looking at our own experiences as that starting place. So it's my assumption, this is what I believe as a leader in equity and as somebody who does facilitation work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I believe that when we begin to see the full spectrum of our own humanity, the full spectrum of ourselves, then and only then are we able to see it in others. So I'm really seeing this hard work as beginning with us. So this work today is really going to bring you in a place where you're talking about your own experiences, and we'll have a couple of activities where you're doing that. I also want to acknowledge that this work takes time, and it is a process, an ongoing process. And we may have the language of equity. We may be able to talk the talk, but we may not be living by equity values on a daily basis. So at Maya Consulting, at our firm, we often are grappling with within ourselves and with each other this idea of like language of equity and labor of equity. Let's start with the language, let's get to the labor. That's what we're going to be doing today. So you may be wondering, who is Maya Consulting? Who the heck is Maya Consulting, and who is Rachel Franco? Well, Maya Consulting is a team of educators based in Austin, Texas. And we do our work through 3 primary work streams, and that is strategic planning, project management or technical assistance work, and diversity, equity, inclusion advising. So you'll see today we're doing diversity, equity, inclusion advising, really more from a facilitation lens, but we also do one-on-one advising support. So that's who we are, and a little bit about me. I'm Rachel Franco. I am a first-gen college grad, born and raised in Austin, Texas, multi-generational Mexican Texan, Mexican-American Texan. And I grew up in Austin in a single parent household with, 5 siblings. And when I was growing up, I experienced chronic trauma, chronic stress. And that really is a foundational place of my work and understanding belonging. From 8606 Cameron Loop, from my home, I went to DePaul University in Chicago as a first-gen college grad, and that's where I really started to understand this idea of systematic oppression or systematic marginalization of folks. And I decided that I really wanted to go into teaching. And so I started teaching in Detroit with Teach for America and felt like I just didn't know enough. And so I decided to move back home to Austin to teach my gente, to teach my people. And I still felt like I just didn't know enough about what I thought I knew. And so from there, I went to Harvard to earn my master's degree in education, specifically looking at the intersection of identity and lifelong learning outcomes. So I am all about how does identity and issues of identity impact lifelong learning. That is my bread and butter. That is what I'm passionate about. And I'm so excited and feel privileged and humbled to share what I'm passionate about with you today. So thank you for being here. Here are today's objectives. I'm going to cold call Larkin. Larkin, would you read today's objectives for us?
Love to. Today's objectives are to 1, review equity as it relates to the education system, and 2, to connect our identities to equity-minded leadership.
Thank you so much, Larkin. I want to know from you, I'm looking at your faces right now, show me fist to 5. 5, I understand these objectives right on. 3, I don't really understand them. I need some clarification. 0 or a fist. I have no idea what these objectives are about. I've got a 5 there. 3, 5. 5, thank you, Elizabeth. Awesome. So let me explain just a little bit. This first objective, reviewing equity, that's going to be our least amount of time, our smallest amount of time. And it's really going to have, I'm going to have you, the participants, lead it. So I'm going to ask you to define the difference between equity and equality. And that will be our foundational understanding, level setting on definitions to get us started. Then the bulk of our work, probably 70% of our time, will really demand your attention and engagement in exploring how your identity connects to equity-minded leadership. So remember, it's my assumption that when we begin to see the full spectrum of our own humanity, we're able to see the humanity in others, especially the students that we partner with and the communities that we partner with. Okie doke, I hope that was more clear for you, John. You were the one who I got a little 3 from. So objective number 1, we're gonna be reviewing equity as it relates to education system. So you have seen this illustration, I'm sure, a dozen of times. And I would love for a volunteer, so I'm not gonna cold call you, I would love for a volunteer to unmute themselves and explain to me, what is the difference between equality and equity? Oftentimes we conflate those terms, we use them interchangeably, and they don't mean the same thing. So you tell me the difference. What's the difference between equality and equity? Can I have a brave volunteer unmute themselves? I see you, I know you want to. Okay, Leslie from the coordinating board, can you explain the difference between equality and equity?
Sure. I would say equality is treating everyone as though they're exactly the same. And equity is meeting individuals where they are and meeting sort of structures where they are and trying to provide and transform them in a way that, where the outcomes are closer to the same.
Thank you, Leslie, for that definition. I'm going to push you a little bit more. And notice, folks, if I ask for volunteers, I don't get volunteers. I'm just going to cold call. So you got to be ready. You got to be ready to participate. Leslie, can you tell me about your work at the coordinating board? How do these definitions come into play? So how do you see equality versus equity happening at your work at the coordinating board?
I think equality is the easy one. Like that's sort of a default mode. I think it sort of comes naturally to the government. Like, let's just make the rules and enforce the rules the same for everyone. I think, and I haven't been at the coordinating board long myself, I think like several other of my colleagues, but I think that equity has become an increasing focus along with the acknowledgement that that equality is not enough. And, you know, I see it in conversations all over the board as we try to establish new programs and new systems, just thinking about what unintended consequences of like mere equality might be, like without that lens of structural inequities and the way that we have let down groups of people for, you know, forever. I think there's an increasing acknowledgement that, you know, more is necessary.
Great. Thank you, Leslie, for bringing that application of equality versus equity. Something that I want to pick out that Leslie said here is equality really is the easy place. It's the one size fits all. Being a classroom teacher in the K-12 space, equality was like my first year of teaching, right? Or my second year of teaching, of like, let me try my hardest to give everybody the same thing. And then as I continued teaching, I started entering into that equity space of everyone needs something different to be successful. But let me make this really clear for us today. Equity actually is the starting place. Equity is the starting place for our work. And the reason why it's the starting place is when we have learning experiences, policies, and practices designed to meet the needs of all individuals, from there can we start to reimagine education and transform our world. So equity is really the starting place. And here's some handy definitions for you. So I really see equity as designing policies, practices, having leaders on board that create proportional representations to learning opportunities. That's what I see equity as. So our equity work really is the starting place for our work every day. And I want to know from you, why is it so important to keep the definition of equity in the forefront of our mind? I heard a little bit from Leslie about how she brings those definitions of equality and equity to the forefront of her mind at the coordinating board, but I want to hear from you. Why is it so important to keep the definition of equity in the forefront of our mind? I'm going to ask that you go ahead and respond to this question in the chat. You can either respond privately or to everyone. So right now we're responding to this question in the chat. Absolutely, John. So equity is designing policies, practices, helping our leaders understand that everybody needs different things to be successful. Equity is the understanding that everyone needs different things to be successful. Thank you, Ron. Equity involves ensuring that students have the supports they need to be successful. And that's why equity is the starting place, right? And I've got some private responses from John, from Chris. Absolutely, Afton, I totally agree. Ruby says, so we remain constantly aware of the needs of our students, often changing needs, right? This work is fluid, it's ongoing, it's constantly changing. Leslie, if we don't keep in the forefront, we will perpetuate historic inequities. Thank you for acknowledging that, and we're gonna get into education debt a little bit later, Leslie. Larkin, equity must be foremost because there has been a gap between our educational aspirations and reality. Absolutely. Larkin, I like it that you take it from this place of what we desire and what is happening right now on the ground. Thank you. Elizabeth, without keeping equity at the forefront, then we will continue to offer the same supports for everyone. We'll get to that equality place, one size fits all in education. Thinking are addressing equity in our systems. Thank you. So with those definitions in mind, and the reason why we want to keep them at the forefront of our mind, now we're going to be doing that identity work. So again, remember, it's my assumption that by really taking the time to see this full spectrums of our own humanity, then we can see it in our students. Even when our students look different from us, even when our students come from different places. So I'm going to bring in this exercise called the 3 things exercise. And I want you to know that this exercise is really one of our first qualitative exercises that you can bring back to your institutions. And it's going to be a different qualitative exercise than you're used to, I'm assuming. I'm going to launch a poll here real quick. I want to know, how do you gain qualitative data from your students? How do you gain qualitative data from your students? And if you're not working directly with students, how do you gain qualitative data generally in your work, in your research, on your teams, with your colleagues? 3 folks have participated out of the 9. Let's go ahead and get all 9 folks participating in 30 seconds. Lovely work. 7 of our folks have participated. Just waiting for 2 more folks. Thank you. Okie doke, and I'm gonna ask for a volunteer here. So if you are wanting to participate just once in today's session, now is your time. I'm gonna share these results. It seems like the majority of us gain qualitative data from our students through surveys. Then meetings and interviews. No one really chose assignments, which is what kind of we're focusing on today. I'd love to hear from somebody who chose surveys. Could you unmute yourself and tell me, how do you use surveys to gain qualitative data on your students? How do you use surveys to gain qualitative data on your students?
Hi, this is Chris. We have comment boxes on a lot of that, so we allow the students to provide sometimes very detailed information about opinions they have in regards to the different surveys that we're having them participate in. So we have like a student satisfaction survey, and then we have a graduating student survey, and we have areas for them to put in comments there.
Chris, how do you make those open-ended responses actionable?
Well, we provide that to the people who would use it, and we may look at it and try to find some groupings within them.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to cut you off just by responding yes. Mm-hmm. But it sounds like that was it. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so oftentimes one way that we gather data is from these open-ended responses in our surveys. Today is really going to offer you some exercises that are really rooted in relationships. And so whenever we want to gain more about another person, instead of giving them a survey, what do we do within our relationships? We ask questions. Where did you grow up? You know, tell me about a time, blah, 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 blah. It's really rooted in a relationship when we want to get to know someone. So today's exercises equally are rooted in relationships. And my hope is that you can use these exercises not only with your students, but also with your colleagues. Because remember, this is about humanizing the work, humanizing ourselves, and humanizing the students and the communities that we partner with. So 3 things. Get a pen and paper out. So you want a pen and paper out in front of you, and I want you to write down, really, really write down. Don't give me those canned responses. Really bring your heart into it. Write down 3 things that you are passionate about. 3 people that you love, 3 identities that are most salient, and 3 events in your life that made you who you are. Really think about this. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to respond to each of these 3 things. And then you'll be paired up in a breakout room with one colleague, and you'll share every single one of these 3 things. I see y'all writing. Great work. You're going to share out in just 1 minute with a colleague. And if you finish early, can you just give me a thumbs up? Either through a reaction or through chat, just so I know you're done early. Okie doke. You should have your 3 things ready. Just wrapping up, and now I'm going to send you into breakout rooms. And I want you to share every single one of your 3 things with a colleague. So you should be joining breakout rooms at this time. Kevin, do you need help going to breakout rooms?
Perhaps so. I clicked to join. It said that I could go to breakout room 7, and I clicked to join, but it never sent me.
Dang it. Okay. Can you try one more time?
Sure.
Maybe, okay. Oftentimes there's like multiple windows that come up.
Yeah, I can.
If you, yeah.
Well, nothing hiding back there.
Dang it. Well, tell me some of your 3 things.
So a couple of things on the first topic. Are you ready real quick? We'll have to run through this quick, but I have a senior daughter who just graduated from high school. So one of the first topic is I'm interested in listening to and shaping, continuing to shape my daughter and hear her views, reflecting on those. So that's one of the, passionate about education and recognizing the community in which I get to live and work, and how we can impact that from the mission of the community college and where we are, and then that opportunity. Just real quickly, I'll move love, wife, daughter, parents, identities, educators, community members. Don't have a third one on that yet.
That's okay.
Shaped me. Spent summer backpacking through Europe right after high school with 3 Danes. So I was the only American, and just kind of that shaped my worldview pretty considerably. I was I served as adult probation officer, so I recognized into some of that world. And then an opportunity to return to school after I was married and had a family. So opportunities to see how some of our students fall into that world as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate you sharing with me. Sorry, breakout rooms didn't work out this time.
No problem.
Boy, howdy. That's what's coming up for me right now. Boy, howdy. There's a lot that we are bringing to our work each day. Welcome back, everyone. I really want to hear from you. As I heard from Kevin, this question was popping up for me. How do these parts of you show up in your work? How do these parts of you show up in your work? I'm going to go ahead and cold call on Kelly. I see you, Kelly.
Hello.
Hey there.
Okay. Hey. So what I took from this, how I like some of my responses were my family and how I was taught, and I think that shaped me and who I was. So like treating people with respect, dignity. I feel like that, and events that have happened in my life, my passion for serving transfer students, for serving our community, our family, that has kind of shaped me and how I identify with this.
Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate you sharing how these parts of you show up in your work. John, I'd like to hear from you. John D., how do these parts of you show up in your work?
So actually a lot of what I put down has nothing to do with my work, but
a challenge, I hear.
So I used to be a professional musician. I played in professional orchestra, and when I was even younger, I sang in some professional choirs. So it's kind of, when you do that, you're creating music with a whole bunch of individuals that collectively make a singular product. And you know, artists, like some populations are very different, and sometimes with their own idiosyncrasies, and everyone's got their niche and the thing that they do, and you just need to work together as a family to make a beautiful product. That's all I got.
That's perfect, John. Thank you for sharing. Something that I'm getting out of both Kelly's response and John's response is this idea that there are different unique parts of us that our students share as well. So those different creative parts of you that come out organically in who you are, the way you process information, the way that you work with others, our students have those same unique pieces. And so these questions are coming up for me of like, what does it mean for our students when they cannot share those parts of themselves on our campuses? What does it mean for our students when they can't share all of the unique parts of them in their work as students? What does it mean when they don't feel safe on our campuses? When students don't feel safe on campus, they're not going to learn, right? We're always prioritizing, at least I'm always prioritizing in my own work. How can I bring Maslow's overblooms? Psychological safety, belonging, are my basic needs getting met before I come to campus? How, as an institution, can we meet those basic needs? I also want to flag for us here that, and who was I working with just a minute ago? It's also important here to know that our students want to be known. Just like our daughters and our sons, our children want to be deeply, deeply known by us, our students equally want to be deeply known by the institutions that they chose to attend. So our students are really asking us to know me, hear me, see me. Our students are inviting us into this equity work. And it's a question of, are we going to answer them on that invitation? I want to share a little bit about where I'm from, and then I'm going to ask you to do the same. So I am from is another activity that you can steal, that you can use with your colleagues, with your students, and it's really a grounding exercise on what is being brought every day to this work. So I'm going to share a little bit of where I'm from, and then I cannot wait for you to write your poems and share where you're from. This exercise always gets a little bit dewy-eyed. It always gets a little teary-eyed. So I want to invite you into that space. So this is where I'm from. I'm from Pots on the Stove, from Bluebell Ice Cream and Quaker Oats. I am from the red brick two-story, trailer home, duplex, and the woods behind them. I'm from aloe vera plants growing wild against the broken down red truck. I'm from Great American Cookie Cakes on your birthday and curly brown hair. From Roxanne and Salvador. I'm from talking too loudly and with your mouth full. From get your elbows off the table. And I'm so proud of you. I'm from church on Sundays, nap all afternoon Sundays, fried chicken Sundays. I'm from Austin, Texas, and San Luis Potosí. Barbacoa tacos and barbecue chicken. From Papa Grande running away from the police with his shoe shine kit. The scar on my brother's lip and the other on his eyebrow. The pictures of family members now gone. the yellowed cigar box sitting empty, the UT football cap unmoved from the altar in the front room, sacred elementos honoring the lives of those that came before. That's where I'm from, and now I want to hear where you're from. Go ahead and respond to this template, and I'll also drop it in our chat box. But I want you to write your own poems, stopping right after the name of family member. So you'll stop there. So in my poem, I would stop at I'm from Roxanne in Salvador. I'll give you 5 minutes to write this poem, and then you'll be sharing your poem in breakout rooms. If you need to see the template a little bit more up close, I dropped it in our chat for everyone. And you can also save it if you end up using this activity and enjoying it. You have about 4 minutes left. Remember, you're going to stop at from the name of family member and another family member. Y'all are doing a great job. Remember, there's no right or wrong here. You're really just sharing where you're from. You've got 1 minute and 30 seconds left. Can't wait to hear your poems. Okie doke, my timer is off. Can you give me a thumbs up if you're ready to go? Or if you're not ready to go, let me know how much more time you need. Kelly says I'm ready to go. Sweet, thank you, Kelly. John or Kevin? Oh, John's good. Okay, Kevin's good. Kevin's somewhere in between. I'll give you about 10 more seconds while I get breakout rooms ready. Okay, so I'm gonna send you to breakout rooms. I want you to share where you're from with your colleague, seeking to understand where they're from.
Rachel, I don't know what's happening with my breakout rooms, but it shows that I'm going to the breakout rooms, and then almost instantaneously it says going back to the main room. So it's putting me in and then moving me back.
It's so annoying. Let's see. I'm gonna move you to another breakout room real quick, and you should get a dialog box asking you to join. Okay, so let me see if that happens for you. So I just moved you. Is there any pop-up box asking you to join?
No, it did that originally, within this exercise, and that was breakout room 6 this time versus 7 last time. And when I click join, same thing happened.
Ugh. Bummer. Well, without seeing your screen, it's hard for me to see what's going on.
Yeah,
would you be okay, for the sake of time, to continue working with me?
I don't mind. I am happy to do so, but I recognize this is all being recorded, and I don't want to be the poster child to the video.
Whoa, I absolutely understand that, Kevin. Okay, let me see if I can get you to another room. Can you share your screen with me?
Sure.
Okay, let me get back to resume share.
It says, yeah, host has disabled the attendee, so.
Yeah, give me 2 seconds.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, now you should be able to share. Darn it, yeah, okay, so you really got the same thing going on. Okay. Let me see. There's Zoom, okay. Can you pull up your Zoom app?
Okay, I think that's what's on this. I think that's
Your blue widget at the bottom. Go ahead and click in that. Your blue camera widget. Okay.
And that's what's on my screen now.
Okay, and then click. Darn it. Darn it, Kevin. I wish I knew how to help you. I don't.
I can respect that, and let's move on with the group. I've got a few things, and I'm gaining a lot of background that I'm going to use. So,
Okay.
Don't feel bad. I can. I'm probably not a strong contributor anyway. So hey, it's all good. It's helping me, and I think it'll help where we're coming from. So let's move on. Thanks, and don't feel bad at all.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin.
Awesome.
Let's see. Okay, I've got us back. How old is your daughter, if you don't mind me asking?
She is 17, will be 18 in August, yeah.
Junior in high school or senior?
So she just graduated, actually.
Wow, congratulations, Dad.
Yeah, that's where we are. So anyway, those are impacting all of us, and she's this whole experience of where our environment is now is definitely impacting us, and getting an opportunity to view it from a second or tertiary lens at least. So it's been
Absolutely.
We've been trying to recognize full recognition of that.
Yeah. Okie doke. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you were able to get an opportunity to share where you're from and hear where a colleague is from while seeking to understand. I would love to hear from Afton. Afton, can you unmute yourself and share?
Yeah, I knew you were going to call on me.
How'd you know?
Because I almost sent you a note that I don't share personal information or circumstances. So I'll let you ask somebody else.
Well, let me narrow it. I'm going to challenge you a little bit and narrow it a little bit. What is one thing that you have in common with the colleague that you were paired up with?
Oh, this is easy. Ruby and I are wearing the same shirt.
Oh, Afton, you are really, really reluctant. Okay. I totally hear you.
I think we had a great after discussion, and I appreciate Ruby and I obviously come from different backgrounds. We all do. But we were discussing the fact that assumptions can't be made anymore about students.
Sure.
And if you aren't first generation and you have been blessed, those students need help just as much as other students. It's that look of what is equality and what is equity. And for a long time, the state and federal government has thought that money would do the trick. And we are quickly learning. I was sharing with Ruby, there is a study a couple years ago that UT Austin, I would love to see it, find it. It may be finished now, but what they did was they have been studying the outliers, the students who come with money, the students who came from private schools, academically successful, and they're not finishing. So I think this is very relevant for every student. And we, for a long time, have looked at certain groups. That's what Ruby and I were discussing. You can't narrow it down to just a certain, gender or certain race anymore, because you're right. All students are bringing different things to our institutions. And when we meet students based on assumptions that they put on their application, we miss the opportunity for what I call transformational learning. And so we've got to move from transactional to transformational. And that's what I think equity is when you're looking at transforming all students, no matter where they came from. And that is when your community, your state, those students do stay connected and do own that. So that's what we had in common, besides our shirt, Rachel.
Afton, I'm going to go ahead and take myself off video. You can go ahead and lead the rest of the presentation.
No. I'm not as calm as you are, Rachel. I appreciate you're excellent. I agree with Leslie. I've learned a lot just by your two presentations. So you go ahead.
Well, let me tell you this. I think what Afton is bringing up here is so important, is oftentimes we have labels for students that we use so interchangeably, and those labels go ahead and create a story for students without even giving them the opportunity to tell us their stories. And so this example that Afton gives of students who are not first gen coming to our campuses and our institutions, they still have a ton of needs and experiences and strengths that they are bringing to our campus that we are not yet utilizing. So Afton, that point, it's so right on. Thank you for sharing that. I want to hear from Leslie. Leslie, if you could unmute yourself and share with us, how do these parts of you that you shared in your poem, how do those parts of you show up in your day-to-day work?
That's a great question, because I think the things that I kind of mined for this poem, they feel like a long time ago, you know, like so remote in some ways. So I don't have a great immediate answer for that, you know, except just the feeling that like ourselves as students, I think, is always present for us in the work we do in education. And that's our first experience with this system that we're all acting on in different ways. So I think it just, it plays out in a lot of ways that we're probably totally unconscious of, but I will think about more now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Leslie. I think that that's a little bit of the point, right? Is we don't realize that these really tender parts of us are actually showing up day to day in our work. And so this, I'll speak from my own experience, this younger me who's running around barefoot outside next to the broken down red truck, that shows up in my place of work of wanting to feel like I belong, of not feeling like I'm alone. And so that plays out in my work, because then, as you can tell, I'm so passionate about folks who are often marginalized, folks who are often on the edges, of bringing them in and saying, yes, you do belong. It's the same with our students and the same with our colleagues. So I'm going to ask you this question, and then we're going to move on for the sake of time. How could you use this exercise with our students? How could this exercise be utilized? Some responses I've heard is freshman seminar, or with my colleagues on an upcoming retreat. Yes, that's all fine and good. And I think that you can often return to this poem over and over again. Have it in a part of your office that you can look to and reference, knowing that those parts of you are coming in your work. And also, the students that you work with want to know those parts of you. They also want to share those parts with you, so that you can better design learning experiences that bring out and meet those parts. Kelly, can I have you unmute yourself and go ahead and read this quote for us?
Sure. Living our identities is much like breathing. We don't have to ask ourselves each morning who we are. We simply are. Identity is never fixed. It continually evolves, but it stays constant, even when we change. We are recognizably who we are, who we have always been. Identity links the past, the present, and the social world into a narrative that makes sense and embodies both change and continuity.
Thank you, Kelly, for reading. I'm going to pause here and let you absorb this quote, thinking about how does this quote apply to our students? Kevin, I'm going to cold call you. If you could unmute yourself. One of two questions, you take your pick. What's coming up for you right now, or how does this quote apply for our students? Apply to our students?
I think as it applies to our students, and I don't want to exclude ourselves in the same way, and that is, you know, what really strikes me, at least initially, is even in the first sentence, living our identities is much like breathing. So our identities, you know, it's who we are, and therefore, you know, to use improper grammar, I'll just say,
please,
who we are, where does that come from? And so that's one of the things that I think about here. It says we simply are. Identity is never fixed. And so with that, to some degree, it implies to me that someone is evaluating fixed. Because if that's the case, then if fixed, what does fixed really mean in that way? And I think that's part of the challenge that we have here is that we see in our world and in our environment these days, and that is people are evaluating where other people are and maybe even where they are coming from, and therefore, since they are not like us, then they are broken from there. So I just think about it to look at it from an inclusionary aspect, to recognize some of that identity never being fixed, continually evolving. Now, when I think about it that way, if I continue to look at it, then I see fixed being used in a different term, and fixed being stationary, and that's the aspect of that. So I think there's multiple ways, and I think the secondary way is probably the way the author intended the quote, but I think as I initially read this, it's the way it strikes me.
Kevin, are you an educator? You're smart, man. I love that reading.
Pretend one.
I love that reading of this quote. You're absolutely right. Oftentimes, there's this assumption that we have on our parts, I think, of we see people's identities and that identity is fixed from our perspective. We have an idea, we tell a story about who that person is. But that's just not true. Identities are constantly evolving and constantly changing. You might be telling a story about who I am by the way that I'm presenting, the clothes that I'm wearing, what you see in the background. But we know it's so much deeper than that. There's so many different parts of ourselves and of our students that are going on. We're now going to talk about equity-minded leadership. So we're moving more into that qualitative understanding. How can we apply an asset-based lens to the way that we literally talk about students? Because the way that we talk about students has an effect on the way that we design and implement learning experiences for our students. The way that we talk about anybody affects our relationship with them, right? That's what this is getting to. So asset-based thinking and deficit-based thinking is really just a helpful paradigm for embodying the values of equity-based leadership. And I was talking to another practitioner last week, and I was explaining to Z the asset-based thinking versus deficit-based thinking. And Z said to me, isn't this just strengths-based learning? Yeah, pretty much. If you've heard strengths-based learning, this is what we're getting at. So to Kevin's point around seeing a fixed identity in someone, oftentimes deficit thinking sees deprivation in our students, most often in communities of color or in students of color. So we are seeing what they are lacking. When they come to our campuses, we're seeing what they don't know how to do. That kind of thinking, that deficit-based thinking, it really overgeneralizes the student experience instead of acknowledging all of the powerful strengths and unique experiences that they're bringing to the campus to further their learning and to bring in that transformational learning that one of your colleagues is talking about, Afton. So asset-based thinking, instead, getting to that transformational learning, that happens whenever we prioritize the strengths of our students and the communities with whom we partner. So you'll hear me say for the next 10 or so minutes, 15 minutes, you'll hear me say over and over again, what are the strengths that we can build on? What do we know has been successful? That's the difference between deficit thinking and asset-based thinking. It's really looking for opportunities. So this is our big, big, big takeaway. If you take nothing else from this session, I hope you take this away. The way we talk about students can have a major impact on the way we think about improving student achievement. The way we talk about students can have a major impact on the way we think about improving student achievement. So often in moments of frustration, we will blame our students. We'll blame them. We'll blame the communities they come from. We'll blame the institutions that they attended before they attended ours. And I know that those moments happen in frustration, and we all do them. I certainly do them too. But what happens whenever we talk about students through a deficit-based lens is we are actually erasing those parts of them that are unique, that are valuable, that are worthy, that can transform their educational experiences. So through an asset-based lens, it is really a reaction to erasing all the unique parts of our students. We're kind of saying we're not going to do that. We are going to recognize the strengths that our students bring to our campus. So I'm going to give us some things to think through about how to apply an asset-based lens to our leadership. So these are this is kind of your cheat sheet for whenever you start working on your own with your colleagues. So an asset-based lens is really strengths-driven, opportunity-focused, and internally focused. When we're utilizing asset-based thinking, we're thinking about what is already present that we can build on. What is within our locus of control, right? And then it's institutional accountability. I am being held accountable for my actions. My institution is being held accountable for their actions. We are not going to place blame on our students, on the communities they're from, or from the institutions that they've already attended. Asset-based thinking asks the question, what is present that we can already build on? What do we know has been successful for Hispanic and African American students? How can we replicate that success? What do we know has been successful for our male identified students? How can we replicate that? Where deficit-based thinking, it sees that neediness. It's needs driven. It's focused on what our students are lacking. It has, deficit-based thinking really has that Paulo Freire's approach of the banking system. We're seeing our students as empty and as us filling them up with knowledge. What if instead we saw that our students are full, brimming at the top, full of information, full of strengths. And it's our place as an institution of how can we bring out those strengths? So deficit-based thinking is really problems focused. It's externally focused, and it places blame on students themselves. And that's not fair. Deficit-based thinking asks the question, what additional knowledge, skills, resources will we need to find to tackle these pressing problems? Now, this is not a bad question to ask. I'm not saying don't ask these types of questions. You're really seeking help, and I get that. But can you see how whenever we ask this type of question, we're really going on the outside instead of looking at what we already have on the inside? Who are the equity leaders at your institution? Who are the people who are already doing the work? Who are the students who really have a sense, really have a pulse on what other students need to be successful? Those are the consultants. Those are the people that you should really be depending on to improve your institutions, is your students. So whenever we say achievement gap, what I want us to start using, and Larkin Tackett, I heard you say gap earlier, so this is a learning opportunity for you as well. Instead of saying achievement gap, what we're gonna start saying is education debt. And the reason why we're gonna start saying that is whenever we use that gap language, we're comparing our low-income students of color to their white upper-income peers. And our low-income students of color we're not asking them to achieve whiteness or the success of our white students. That's not what we're trying to do. Similarly, whenever we use gap language, it erases the generations and generations of systematic oppression that has gone on within our education sector. And so education debt is a way to acknowledge that specifically for our Black and Brown students, we have denied equitable access to education for generations. Now, here is where we're really going to get into the work, and you're going to start doing this work. In a moment, you will see data from Upper East Texas, and it's your data. And I don't want you to look for excuses and say, well, I don't know how many there African American students are there. Or actually, I can't do this with this data because I don't know yet, blah, 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 blah. We're not going to do that. We're going to look at our data and we're going to talk about it through an asset-based lens. And this is how we're going to do it. So I've got data here from Northwest Texas region. It says 60% of Hispanic female first-time undergraduates graduate from Northwest Texas public universities in 6 years. That's the data point. It's presented in a different way. You'll see your data in a chart or a graph, but this is the data. How I'm going to apply an asset-based lens is I'm going to place institutional accountability into the way that I talk about this data. I'm not blaming students. So I simply say our region has successfully served 60% of Hispanic female students. How is that asset-based thinking? I have institutional accountability here. Our region has successfully served. It's opportunity focused. I'm thinking about how can we build on that 60% to serve the 40% of Hispanic female students that we have not yet successfully served. So I'm really, really placing emphasis on my institution and what we have done well and how we can build off of that. Now it's your turn. I want you to go ahead and take a screenshot of this data in front of you, or you can get your camera out and take a picture of it that way. But I want you to capture this data. And in breakout rooms, I want you to answer this question. How would you talk about this data through an asset-based lens? So pick a data point. How would you talk about this data through an asset-based lens? And I'm actually going to give you 5 whole minutes to talk about this, so you'll spend quite a bit of time in breakout rooms discussing. Bring out those frustrations, bring out those questions. I'm going to send you to breakout rooms. How would you talk about this data through an asset-based lens? Okay, and then Kevin, I'm making sure that you are able to get there. You should be joining breakout room 3, Kevin. Awesome. Welcome back, everyone. I was able to join Ruby's room with Larkin and Afton, and there was some really, really good conversation going on. Afton, you are really bringing it today, which I'm sure you bring it every day into your learning spaces and working spaces.
I'm laughing, Rachel, because Ruby said it's okay to discuss race. And so I will say when we look at wait a minute, did you change the screen?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Okay, I was about to say, because that's what I was going to offer to tell you, that I thought one of the places specifically, not just other, but when we look at there we are, 50% of those male Hispanic students. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
That has gone up over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a wonderful trend. I did say in our group, when we look at that specific population, I would want to do the qualitative. I would want to see what jobs they're going into, what degrees they're getting, because that's going to make a huge difference. If you're turning out certificate ones and they're getting that skill set and they're going into the workforce, that's 60 by 30. That's what we're going for. And so I would just love to break that down, but that's an awesome statistic for our area, because in East Texas, Upper East Texas, we are Hispanic. There's a lot of Hispanic students here. And now, obviously, all across the state and the country, we want to move the needle on African American males. But, and why is that gap? And anyway, but I think that's something, I mean, the males are the same as the white females, so that's amazing. And when we describe that, we say, you know, 51% of Hispanic males have graduate, whatever it was.
Right. I'm going to stop you there, Afton. You gave us a lot to chew on. I think something that is really asset-based thinking that Afton shared with us is she's really seeing what is successful for that 51% of Hispanic males, and how can we translate that not only for our Hispanic males, but also how can we replicate that across our demographics. I think that's right on. Something else that I heard that I would tweak or I would pivot from is I heard Afton compare our Hispanic males to our white females. And that comparison was made, but remember, we're not trying to compare one group of students to the success of another group of students. That's not what we're trying to do. But there's a question here that Afton brings up that I don't want to spend time on, but I want to acknowledge. And that is, why track race and ethnicity? Why do we track race and ethnicity? Why do we categorize students? I don't want anyone to answer that. I just want you to hold that question. Okay, so we've got a new set of data here, and I want you to answer in chat, either to everyone or to me privately. How would you utilize asset-based thinking? How would you apply an equity lens to the data that you have here? How would you talk about it? I'll give you a moment, and then I want you to respond in chat. So right now you're responding in the chat, either to everyone or to me privately. How would you use an asset-based lens in talking about this new data set? Recognizing that this work is both hard and easy at the exact same time. Elizabeth says CTCs have the opportunity to better serve 80% of our African American male students in the Upper East region. Absolutely, Elizabeth. I would want to know about, to Afton's point, what was present for that 20% of African American males? How can we build off of that to better serve 80% of those African American male students? What was present for that 20% of African American male students? And how can we replicate that for our Hispanic students, for our white students? I'm looking for more responses either from everyone or just to me privately. Larkin, 45% of students who identify as Hispanic and female are graduating. What can we learn from their success? Absolutely, Larkin, that's right on. And I love that you use this language of who identify as. Remember, students are identifying, they're making choices about how they are identifying. Our institutions have successfully served about 42% of Hispanic students. You're right, Afton, thank you. Awesome work. So I hope that you can see whenever we're talking about data, it impacts the way that we think about student success. And what we want to be prioritizing whenever we talk about student data is our own accountability, our institutional accountability versus student blame. And then also, what are the opportunities present within our institutions, within our offices, that we can build off of? We're reaching the end of our session, and here is where I want it to come all to the surface. This is my most favorite activity for our session, and you can use this with yourself and with your colleagues in different ways. You've got 4 quadrants, 4 questions to answer on your own. I want you to answer those questions on your own and be prepared to share out 1 response. And every single person will share. I'm going to create a round robin list for you to see. So respond to each of these questions, be prepared to share 1 response. And if you have any questions while you're answering them, just ask me in chat and I'll respond to you in chat. I'm going to put the timer on for just 3 minutes. Okay, by now you should have gotten the opportunity to respond to each of these 4 questions. I would love to hear your response to one of these questions. And this is really going to be almost like a Socratic time of just like listening to each other, giving me as a facilitator the opportunity to respond to some growing points. If there are opportunities there, I will respond to them. So we're going to go in the order that you see in front of you. Afton, if you could unmute yourself, I'm going to have you go first. Share one of these areas with us. What's coming up for you today?
I'm going to say support. So our QEP is about academic coaching. So we actually are in the beginning stages of it, but we're looking at students in History 1301. But is our pilot group we just finished, and we had some pretty good promising, even through the COVID semester. So I think that's something we're going to utilize, and we've done some qualitative work with these students as well, and mentoring, and so really doing the work that needs to be done to address the educational debt, as you called it, for these students. And it's not based on race, it's based on your academic success. So I think that's something, a resource / support, and something our institution is putting a lot of emphasis on. So I'll be interested from a data standpoint to see how well that works coming in the fall, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, Afton. For me, can you briefly say one more time, what is the intervention that you're using with these students?
Academic coaching.
And then real briefly, and we'll move to like
What is that?
Not what is academic coaching. I love that you're anticipating what I'm going to ask you. How do you see academic coaching as implementing equity as a starting place? So how do you see it furthering this equity work that you're doing on campus?
Well, based on the way our intervention is structured, we are meeting students where they are. So we picked a set of students, we asked them to participate. So the pilot group is ownership from students that want to be involved, but it's also a merger of faculty and staff that are committing to mentoring these students. And it's not a mentorship in terms of you're required to do this. So these students are actively seeking it. Yeah. And it's also based on the student as a whole. Yes, academically, but it's really what class is going to fit with. I mean, it's a lot more like holistic advising. So, and that, when we look at that equity and we look at the picture you showed, all of those students are being met where they are, and they're taking ownership. But I will say our institution, I'm very proud of the response rate we've gotten from faculty and staff that a student is a student that needs help. And so they are giving of their time. They're not getting paid, right? So we're moving forward, meeting students where they are.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Afton. What I love about this resource that I think we can use as colleagues is Afton is really pointing to a student-led intervention. So if we're thinking about student-led versus student-centered, what we really want our institutions to be doing is having students lead their own learning, lead their own interventions. So this is a great example of a student-led intervention. Now, where I would push Afton and her institution is just simply looking at who is opting in to this student-led experience and who is opting out. And then making choices or making decisions as an institution of how are we gonna respond to that? I understand this is at the pilot phase, so it's still at the very, very beginning, but that's one question to keep in mind.
But you know what, I know we've got to move to other people, but I will say one of the things we did was we had 3 students come to us that weren't identified in the pilot group, their friends were in it, and we let them join.
Awesome.
So yes, I absolutely agree with what you're saying. So, because students want to join.
Absolutely. Thank you, Afton. Larkin, what's coming up for you? Where are you at?
I think an area of support is just really thinking about the language that we use in education. And I mean, we use the term gap and disparity and all the time, and it's just so baked in to really think about how we make assets and strength-based language the norm instead of the exception, and what, like for us, support for how we do that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Larkin. I love that Larkin is paying attention to the language that we choose. And then also I'm reflecting more and more about how am I as a practitioner placing too much emphasis on language, and how can I as a practitioner move to a place where I may be understanding somebody's using a certain piece of language simply because they don't have other pieces of language yet, but the spirit of equity or the labor of equity is already there. It's already present. Because I don't want us to get hung up on using the right words, not using the right words, because oftentimes that can stymie us and put us in a paralysis place instead of putting us in an action place. Kevin, where are you at? What's coming up for you?
Interestingly enough, just to read exactly what I had written down on support was need to understand language. And so strangely enough, it seems to me, especially in higher education, that I will say I desire to be respectful, to use the term from the onset to use the pronoun I.
Yeah.
I desire to be respectful of all.
Yes.
I also don't believe that that's unlike the balance of our institution. We have a very caring and in general, higher education desires to be respectful of all parties. One of the challenges I think we are seeing in our environment today is that we are beginning to be more and more fearful of offending, and therefore it is stymieing the conversations. And so I think that's one of the challenges, is that we need to continue the conversations with this. And so one of the things that I will strive to do is to learn more about cultural aspects, the things that can help to facilitate these conversations, and so to minimize fear associated with the language itself. I think people that may not reach out and may be a little fearful because they are afraid of, they don't want to do harm when they're intending to do good in these relationships. And so that's what happens with us, is that therefore we just don't say anything. And really in today's environment, I think we've discussed this so much today, is that facilitating conversations, understanding each other, and where when we talked about identity, background, evolution of identity and so forth, is such an important part in the relationship. So that's all to me is about language and minimizing fear of conversations with that. Whereas in today's environment, I think we're more and more getting, we have challenges with that. I'll just leave with that.
Kevin, I don't know what it is about you, but you really bring something in my heart. You really bring it out. There's something really, really sincere and compassionate about what you're talking about. And I hear that and I see that. I really appreciate this effort of wanting to expand our vocabulary. I think today we are at a language deficit, and that keeps us from doing the work. You know, so often with Black Lives Matter, we're hearing silence is complicity. But I think for some folks, we're thinking, well, I'm silent simply because I don't know what to say yet. And I hope that what I'm pushing you on, and I'm pushing others on, is it's okay if you don't have the right words. We're all learning, and we're all trying to share this knowledge together. And so it's okay to say, I don't know how to say this, but I'm going to try my best. I don't know what the right word here is, but I'm going to say this. I think that's okay. And I really appreciate this learning. You have this real learning attitude in your leadership profile, which I love. Bring that learning attitude to your campus. Use some resources, use some texts that you wouldn't normally go to, and bring that to your work. We'll talk a little bit more offline, Kevin, but I want to hear from Kelly since we're getting short on time. Kelly, what's coming up for you?
Okay, well, I said support as well, but I'm very interested. I don't have the data in front of me, but I'm very interested on those Hispanic and Hispanic or African American and Hispanic male students that graduate community college, and why aren't they transferring to regional universities? What are those barriers? Is it jobs? Is it because we don't have jobs in this area? Why is there such a big gap? I know we improved with the Hispanic males to some degree, but I think we have a lot more to work on, considering that we have a large Hispanic population in our communities in Northeast Texas. I know where I'm from, where Kevin's from, we have a very high Hispanic population in our city alone. So I'm just curious on why that is and what support we could possibly get. I'm a practitioner at heart, so what support we could get from, yeah, you can tell, from the coordinating board on how we can better serve our communities and our students. But also, I think, I don't, because this is also new and I'm just speaking openly here, but I think we need to bring in people from our communities, from the Hispanic communities, from the African American, and I think we need to have a diversity committee within the coordinating board. I don't know, a big one for serve the state of Texas, or break it up into regions. That's, you know, I don't know how that would work. I'm just saying this off the top of my head. But why are we not serving these students? We need to get the people in the room that can give us those answers so we can work with them better. And yes, we'll collect the data and that's important, but I'm curious more in the communities where these students grow up, where they're working, where they're raising their families. Why are we missing the gap? Sorry, I'm not sure I'm supposed to use that word, but I think as professionals, education practitioners, we are missing the gap. But I also know, and I'm gonna end it, that we have to have support from the coordinating board. We need leadership and direction on how to do this, because we can't do it alone. When we pride ourselves on being in Texas and being independent, and that's great, but we're in this together, and I think we've got to come together on this to get more answers. So I'm done. Thank you.
Oh boy, howdy, Kelly, you just gave us a lot to work with. I love that. What I specifically want to bring out of what Kelly said is around, for me, this theme of for us, by us, that yes, we absolutely should have our students and the community members that are the communities that our students belong to, we should absolutely have them at the table telling us, hey, this is what is working for us. This is what's working for me. This is how I find success. We should absolutely have students and community members at the table. So much of what Maya does in our partnership work is bringing out stakeholder engagement. How can we better utilize our stakeholders and really listen to what they need? That is so right on, Kelly. I love that. And I love how much you're placing it on the coordinating board. That's exactly what you should be doing. John, what's coming up for you? Putting it on the coordinating board.
Putting it on the coordinating board. Well, at the coordinating board, I feel very removed from the activity of students and learning and teaching. And I guess as a consequence of that, I feel like I sort of wonder what our place is to really drive change in the equity, in the practice of moving to more, equitable higher education. This activity we're doing of having Maya Consulting come, I think is an excellent activity that the coordinating board has done, and is, to my knowledge, one of the more concrete initiatives in that regard. What other further initiatives? I would like to hear more from Kelly. What I was going to talk about was sort of the use of language, and a lot of these equity trainings have focused a lot on language. To me, a lot of it my initial sort of reaction was that, oh, we're going to learn, you know, the hip new terminology, and I wonder how much how much will really change as a result of that. But one of the concrete things I think can inspire change is when I hear examples such as presenting the data as we have an opportunity to graduate 77% of the, you know, African American males, things that inspire action on the part of leadership at an institution, and pathways for the institution to improve, you know, their accountability measures and their numbers and the way they ultimately deliver quality educational services to the students, as opposed to language that identifies the students, oh, they're from lower performing high schools, that sort of put the onus, oh, it's a matter of the past, and we throw up our hands because, you know, they weren't served by others. Rather, language that inspires action by those who have the opportunity to make a difference at the time. I think that is an important, concrete way that the language we use can make a difference, and it's more than just learning the new hip terminology.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate those thoughts. I agree that when we're talking about the language of equity and all of the cool hip new terms that we're learning, starting to learn all of that, it is both a starting place and right in the middle of the work. So it's both and constantly. It's both a great place to start and it's not enough. So I get that. There's a couple things you said, but we're gonna keep moving on. I think Leslie stepped out. So we're gonna pass it off to Chris, and then we'll close with our post-session assessment, our exit ticket. So Chris, if you could unmute yourself.
Okay, well, I want to look at where I'm successful.
Sweet.
And a lot of it is because of the position I'm in, institutional research, I have the opportunity to provide the information to leadership. And so I'm able to help identify areas where we can look for improvement. I know we're not supposed to be looking at the negative side, but yes, I can say that we're successful in this area, but here's an area where we really could be focusing on and we can be moving ahead on. And, you know, or maybe even if we look at some of the individual classes and who's teaching what, and like, are we doing good with distance as well as face-to-face? So what are we doing different, or what are some of the instructors doing different? And that's one of the things that our college uses at Learning Day is some of the more successful instructors, they will have a session as to what they're doing with their students.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris, for sharing that. I love this focus on building off of what is already successful. We're bringing out opportunities from what has been successful on our teams, in our institutions, individually. How can we bring out that success? That's beautiful. We are going to move into our exit ticket now. So give me 2 seconds to post this for you in our chat. So in the chat, you'll see our exit ticket. And that is really helpful data for me to build off of the strengths that were in this session, but also really helpful data for the coordinating board to respond to your future needs. So go ahead and take a moment to respond to that. And then I want to make sure that our coordinating board folks are set up for success. So can you just tell me in the chat, done, when you're done, and then that way we know to move on and transition. Thank you, John, I see you. Done, awesome. Okay, then without further ado, I am so grateful and thank you, grateful and thank you for this session. I'm so grateful that you were able to share parts of you. I was able to hear those parts. I'm tripping over my words. Thank you. I'm going to pass it off to the coordinating board.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank all of you for your participation today. I know we had some really rich and engaging discussions. This is probably one of those sessions where I just felt like there wasn't enough time. I just feel like we needed to get into this a little bit more, but you know, we only have so much time to do that. So, but what we don't want you to do is in your discussions and in the work with this training, of course, we want you all to continue. And from a coordinating board perspective, I would like to see us be able to work more closely with our institutions to provide some support for the equity work and taking your equity work to the next level. That's something that, you know, we have these discussions. There are no guarantees, but I am hopeful that may happen. But of course, feel free to reach out to me if you have specific questions. And so I will provide whatever help that I can in terms of what you may be working on and what you're thinking of doing. So thanks again for your participation. And we are going to go ahead and move into our discussions and demonstration of the Tableau dashboards. So Luis and Elizabeth will take you to that, and we will make the transition now. So thanks again, everybody.
All right, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Ruby. So Luis is gonna walk us through some tips and introduce you to our new regional dashboard. I want a couple things I want to cover. Please keep in mind that this is the first draft, right? So this is version 1.0 of the dashboards that we're introducing to you and giving you an opportunity to play with and see a little bit so you can give us some feedback on your thoughts. So we will be doing some quick polls asking you for feedback, as well as welcoming comments in the chat section, as well as if you have any questions as we're going through it, please feel free to pop it in chat and we'll make sure it gets addressed. As Luis is walking us through this, if you see something you really like, if you could give us a 5 in the chat box, that would be great. If you see something that you don't like so much or you don't feel like it's really working that well for you, please give us a 1 in the chat box so that we know that. As well as any additional thoughts that you may have as we're going through. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Luis and let him start walking us through our Tableau tips.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay, let me share my screen. Just 1 second. Okay. There we go. All right, give me a thumbs up if you can go ahead and see my screen. Okay, great. All right, thank you very much. All right, so my favorite part of the summer was always summer school. So in that same spirit, we're gonna have a little pop quiz for the Upper East region. Today's pop quiz is gonna be just 1 question, but it's gonna count for 100% of your summer grade, all right? So I hope you've studied, that you're ready on this. The question is, in terms of growth in high school to higher ed direct enrollment, there were only 4 regions who had growth in the last 3 years. Was Upper East region one of those 4 regions? All right, I'm gonna make this open book then. I'm gonna show you how to get this answer, okay? And I'm gonna use the dashboards to get you there. I'm going to show you some 5 designs that we baked into the dashboards to help you navigate the data and navigate the views. And then I'm going to show you 3 manual ways that you can do some self-discovery analysis. And I'm going to start by using the 60x30 regional dashboards. After I go through some of these tips, we're going to give you the URL so you can go ahead and play around with it and use some of the tips that I've shared. but also just play around with it on your own, because there's a lot more things that you can do with it that because of time, I won't be able to show you this moment, okay? So under regional dashboards, this is the 60 by 30. And we have it here on Upper East. I'm just gonna blow it up to full screen. And so what we try to do is, when we design this, is get into the mind of the end user and say, you know, what would make it the most friendly, would make it the most intuitive for people who are either new to the regional work or who had, you know, seasons of experience in this work. We want to get you both on the same starting point. So a couple of things that we did is that the navigation, it starts up here where I'm clicking regional targets overview, and then you have some other tabs back here that go all the way to direct enrollment. So in order to navigate through this, what you'll see is that once you're on an active view, the background will turn white. When the view isn't active, it's a light gray background. So it lets you know that there's more information back there. You just have to click on it in order to view it. In order to get everyone sort of on the same page, is we had a brief narrative at the top of each view to let you understand what data that you're viewing, how you can use it, and just how can you get started. The first thing that we baked into this design was that we wanted to make sure that if you select a region once in a view, that that region would be remembered throughout the rest of the view. So you're looking at data for that region. Unless you wanted to go back and forth, you also have that flexibility. So the first baked in design was select a region, and that's how you start by viewing data for each of the views. So in here, select a region, you have already, but if you click on the upside down triangle, it becomes a drop down list, and you have all the other 9 regions. So if you want to look at their data as well, you can go ahead and compare yourself to those other 9 regions, okay? So the second thing that we did was that we put in some bands or some KPIs, which is numbers that we think are important that you should focus on. So we want to draw your attention to them, and they're here in this area. So in particular instance, you see 2018 current, 2030 target, and then you see the 3 target areas for 60 by 30 educated population, completion, and direct enrollment. Those are what we want to draw your attention to. And then with the graphics, we wanted to get a little bit snazzier. So one example of it is these 3 horizontal bar charts. They're progress charts, so they'll let you see at the beginning of the plan, 2015, what was the baseline year data. Then at the end of the bar is 2018 data, which is one of the most current. And then the dotted green line is a 2030 target. And those are the ones by the state for the region, okay? So I want you to know that that's how we did a couple of things. So the first thing that we baked in is the select a region. The second thing was the bands or KPIs here. And you'll see both throughout the views. So I'll go over into, not this one yet, but I'll go over into, oh, no, sorry. There we go. Okay, so in this completion by demographics, again, you see the select a region, you see the band. Another thing that I wanted to point out that we baked into this was the third thing, which is called tooltips. Tooltips are a way to help explain the data a little bit better, because we wanted a very clean look, and so real estate was really important on the page, and we didn't want to clutter with a bunch of information, but we also didn't want to give you not enough information where you were left wondering like, well, what is this, and what are you counting? Tooltips is where they come into place. And the way that you see tooltips is that you put your mouse, just hover and discover, put your mouse around different numbers, different graphs, and these tooltips will pop out. And so here you see the definition of what this means, that this is the sum of certificates, associate degrees, bachelor degrees awarded by Upper East in 2018. So what you're looking at is this band for the year 2018, and it's broken down by sector. And the tooltip will tell you, well, what do we mean by that? Another cool thing with the tooltip is that we're able to put in even more information. For example, I go to the stacked bar chart, and we're looking at race, ethnicity, the region, the hard number that you see on the screen already, but the other thing that it gives you is the percent. So what percent of students who are African American comprise Upper East completions in the year 2014? So it tells you that. And then it also tells you, you know, how others are reported, okay? So that's that. And then I'm gonna jump around over here to direct enrollment, because I wanted to show you something else that we did. So in this band, you have a little bit more information than in the others. And in direct enrollment for Upper East, this 47.7%, that's the direct high school to higher ed enrollment for the year 2018. And you'll see it in a couple of other places, but the reason we put it right at the top of this band was because we wanted to draw your attention to what is your 2018 number, okay? And a couple other places that you'll see it is if you go down to the lower left in this line graph, you'll see 2018, 47.7%, the same number there. Now, for those who are interested in saying, well, how does that break down into sectors? So that's where we have them broken down to sectors here. You have the hard count for independent, and then you also have the percentage that of students who enroll in independent and public 2 years and in public universities. And again, you'll get the tooltip that will give you a little bit more information of how we calculated this rate, okay? We also want to give you the opportunity to go ahead and start doing some self-discovery analysis. And so a couple of things that we put in, one is called a highlighter, and that's under here where it says select a school district, and in light gray says highlight school district. When you click on that, it's a smart. So smart in the sense that each ISD that you're viewing in this drop-down menu is only tied to the Upper East region. So you won't have to go and, you know, hunt and peck because it has all the ISDs in the state. We try to make it a lot more user-friendly by saying, let's only tie in the East. And I'll show you how to use that in just a couple of seconds. The graph below is a box and whiskers plot, and this box and whiskers plot is only for Upper East. So it's direct enrollment by ISD. So these are all the ISDs, sorry, let me rephrase that. These are ISDs who meet FERPA requirements in Upper East. And what you're doing is you're being given the opportunity to compare ISDs by year from 2014 to 2018 and by each other. So what you're looking at down here is the percentage of direct enrollment rate of high school students to higher ed, okay? So now let me show you how to use this. So one of the ways is if there's a certain ISD that you want to get some information on, let's say, for example, Athens. So with Athens ISD, the way that this is working is before they were all darker green dots. Now most of them are light green dots. And there are a few of them that are a little bit darker, and those 5 that are a little bit darker, those are the ones that are tied to Athens ISD. So for example, if we go here, oh, there we go. If we go here, we see that for the year 2017, 44.7% of Athens ISD's seniors enrolled into higher education that year. And not only do we see the percentage, but we see the total number of students. So we can get even a deeper dive into the data to say, you know, percentage, students, hard count, so we can then compare them to others. Well, another way that you can use this box and whiskers plot is that, let's say you already know Athens ISD, you can start comparing it to like who's below it, who's above it, who's all the way at 100%, and, you know, what are those numbers, and maybe, you know, what kind of conversations do we have with those folks to understand how they're getting those numbers. What you won't see in here, and I mentioned it earlier, is the non-FERPA compliant. So there are some school districts throughout the state that we can't show you data because it's not FERPA compliant, because we can't protect their privacy. So they're just taking out of the equation. It doesn't change the rate at all. They're just basically hidden from the data, okay? There's one more thing I wanted to show you before we share the URL and let you go ahead and play around with it, okay? In the meantime, you can feel free to ask questions in the chat, or you just go ahead and stop me here and I'll be happy to answer them as well, okay? So the other way to do self-discovery analysis was by the use of highlight tables. So by highlight tables, I mean these down here where you see the gradients of blue, and then you also see some white font color in the background. The reason we're using these is because whether you come from data or whether you come from like an arts field, whenever you're giving a table, it is just by training, either because we have all gone through some of this somewhere, either elementary school or high school or college, and they're like, well, look at this data. And the first thing that we look at is like, whoa, what stands out? Whoa, how can we read this data? And so one of the most efficient ways to do that is by the use of color. And so the way that we do it here is that the gradient blue, the darker it is, it means the higher that number is, or in this case, the percentage. And so we see for Upper East that dark blue is really standing out for baccalaureate degree. And so baccalaureate degrees have been the highest percentage of credentials awarded in the Upper East from 2014 to 2018. So it makes it easy to read, okay? I think a little bit better example is down here in the population table for 2018 and the 2020 projections. So not only do you get that gradient, but you also get the font color. So for example, if we look at the ages 0-17 or 25 to 34, we see, for example, that white, has the largest counts of population and projections. But we can also use that data to find out, well, what's kind of the rank of the other ethnicities and races. So we see that Hispanic is second, African American is third, and other is fourth. So it helps us to interpret the data at the same baseline and then draw other conclusions we want from it, okay? All right, so I'll take a moment to pause here and see if there are any questions.
There haven't been any questions pop up in the chat, but if anyone has a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask as well.
Mm-hmm. So we'll leave the pop quiz up. Thank you, Elizabeth, for putting that up there. I like that. We'll leave that up and we can go ahead and share the URL so folks can go ahead and click and point and hover and discover and, tell us all kinds of fascinating insights that they can get out of this.
Okay, so I just dropped the URL in the chat for you all. This should allow you to open up the dashboard and play with it a little bit on your own. We aren't going to give you a lot of time today to play with it. This is just sort of the initial introduction, but please know that the link will continue to be good after today's session. So you'll have the opportunity to play on your own some with it. And if you have any questions or thoughts, please feel free to email Luis or myself after you've had more time to look at it. In the meantime, we'll give you a few minutes here and then we're going to ask you some quick questions about usability and friendliness basically of the dashboard and whether it's addressing questions you've had, because we decided to start with the regional work as a place for using Tableau dashboards because we've had a lot of questions about people wanting to be able to look at the data in different ways. So we're hoping that we've addressed at least some of those in this initial go round with the dashboard.
Right. And when Elizabeth gives us the 1 minute countdown, feel free to answer that pop quiz question, or if not, I can give you the answer. Remember, it counts for your whole summer grade.
I see we already have some people voting. Thank you. Thank you for the great comments, Afton and Kelly. But we do seriously welcome if you have any suggestions for improvement as well. Don't feel like pressured to say positive things because, you're right here and now. Because of course we think it's wonderful, but we want to know whether you think it answers everything you need or not.
Hey, Elizabeth, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
And I think this is great. and I'm not just saying that, I mean, this is good stuff, especially for institutions like myself that are larger with 1 people in their IR office. This is going to do a lot. But my question is, you know how in the other accountability system, you could do a PDF and like share and that jazz? Is this capable of doing that? And I missed it.
So Luis, you want to show everybody how you can do that? So you are capable of doing sharing. Why don't we wait like until we're ready to close the poll? So I'll give you all like another minute, and then we'll make sure that's one of the first things Luis hits when he goes into showing us the other piece.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, since Elizabeth gave us the 1-minute countdown, let me show you that Upper East, you should give yourselves a pat on the back because you are one of the 4 regions who's had growth in the high school to higher ed enrollment. But more importantly than that, you're also in the top 2 who's had growth in high school to higher ed enrollment. So I'll let you do this on your own just because of time. But if you drop down and select the other regions, you'll see that there's only one other region who has a little bit higher growth rate than Upper East, but even the other 2 other regions who've had the growth rate, their growth hasn't been as high as yours. So whatever you're doing is working out there, and it might lead to good conversations as to what other resources you could use to maybe bring that higher, or what best practices you can share. So congrats on that, so everyone gets a passing grade for having a good high school higher enrollment rate.
Okay, right. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll so
Yep.
that you can move into showing the information, the next piece.
So we're going to go back to that URL, and under institutional completions dashboards, I can show you 2 things. So before we go to full screen view, which is all the way to the lower right, to the left of that is this box with an arrow pointing down. That's where you download. So you'll click on that and you'll have 3 ways that you can download it. You can either download it as an image, so it'll give it to you like a JPEG, a PNG, and whatever else your computer can handle. Then you'll also get the opportunity to download it as a PDF, so you can just go ahead and pop it into a one of those documents and use that into one of your reports. Or if you're in the ubiquitous PowerPoint world, you can go ahead and pop this into a PowerPoint. The only caveat is that you won't have the interactivity that you have online. That's just reserved for the online version of Tableau. But other than that, you can get all the pictures, and what I've done to make up for some of that lack of interactivity, I'll just put notes on the PowerPoint highlighting things that I want to make sure people know. Okay?
So Luis, how come they can't download the data?
Good question. The reason you can't download the data is because we have data for both public institutions and the independent colleges and University of Texas, or our private institutions. And with Tableau, with our license, we either give you all the data, and the drawback to that is that at the coordinating board, we're not allowed to show you I-cut information by gender or race and ethnicity. We have to only aggregate it for you. So in that case, you either get everything or nothing. And so to stay out of trouble, we're making sure that people can't access that private data. So we're working on figuring out ways to be able to give you the raw data that's only for public institutions and let you play around with it on your own if you wanted to.
So just like with the ISDs where we can't see all of them because some of them are too small for us to remain FERPA compliant, then we can't share the I-cuts data because we aren't allowed to.
Right. So the 5th thing that I want to show you that we baked into this dashboard has to do with giving you more flexibility. So let's go ahead and change the region from Gulf Coast to Upper East. Again, you'll see this highlight table here, right? And where select a region, an institution, or a year, those are all filters. So you can filter out the data whichever way you want. The other filter that gives you a little bit more flexibility is you can either see this table as a count, which will put value here, or you can see it as a percentage. And that'll help out with conversations if people want to say, well, what does 93% equal out of total of 1,008? And instead of having people do mental mathematics, all you have to do is give them this drop down, and then it becomes a percent. And the percent is done across the row. So for example, for Kilgore College here, you'll see the percent of each race or ethnicity, and it adds up to 100% for the year 2018. And so you can keep changing it for the years up here for select a year. And you'll also see this kind of flexibility in the independent completions by race and ethnicity. So we give you even a little bit more flexibility here, because not only do we do ethnicity value percent, but also gender value percent. So you can play around with both however you want to show it, okay? So those are the 5 things that we baked into the design of the dashboard. And one additional thing that you get in the institutional dashboard is, instead of navigating, or in addition to navigating by clicking on the different tabs up here, you can actually click on this upside down triangle, and it'll give you all the tabs at once. So you can navigate whichever way suits you. We can go all the way back to institutional completion and target. Okay. So one thing that the institutional dashboard doesn't have that the regional dashboard does have is that once you select a region at the beginning, it'll remember it throughout. Because of some design here with Tableau, at the beginning of this dashboard, you'll see Gulf Coast is still selected, even though I selected Upper East in the other view. Well, here's how that would work. So you go to region, and let's say you select Upper East, and there's no data because it's still showing that it's for Alvin Community College. Well, to make it easier to you to get around that barrier is that this is also a smart drop-down list. So each institution you see there is only for institutions in the Upper East region. So let's stick with Kilgore because we had them on the other view. Or you know what, we'll change it just for the time being to Northeast. So you can see a little bit difference. So here now you see the data for Northeast Texas Community College. It's also a progress bar for institutional completions and targets. And these targets are the ones that were sent in by the respective institution. So Northeast Texas Community College sent in the 2030 target. And that's what we have on there. And below you'll see a line graph that shows the actual counts of the completions from 2014 to 2018. Now you see here that it didn't remember it. It didn't say like that's what it is. So again, you just go down into the drop down, and here we can switch it to Kilgore College, or you know what, let's stick to Northeast Texas just for. And now you see the data for completions by credentials and undergraduate completions among economically disadvantaged students for this particular institution. And so the second manual thing that you can do with this dashboard is you can start to sort it. So you get this default view that gives you ascending or gives you ascending order by year. The way that you would sort it is that you go into the hard counts, and the hard counts in some cases will be in the y-axis like it is here. Other cases it'll be on the x-axis. You'll get this 3-bar chart with the arrow pointing to the right, and that's where you can sort. And when you sort the first time, it's going to look at the highest number of overall credentials for this institution. And then it will put in descending order. So we see here that 2018 was the highest and 2016 was not the highest for Northeast Texas College. So you can go ahead and sort it out that way. If someone has a question like, well, how does 2018 rank in terms of years and things of that nature? Instead of having people do, you know, math in their head, you can go ahead and let them play around with it in this way. Something else that you can do with this is that if you only want to see, for example, certificate degrees, for whatever reason, let's say a request comes in and says, I want to see the number of certificate degrees awarded from 2014 to 2018, and I want them in descending order. So tell me which ones are the highest. Well, this will help you do that. You won't have to write any code anymore. So in this legend down here, it's tied to the bar chart. You put your mouse on whichever legend marker you want. In this case, I'm going to put certificate. And by clicking on it, I get this other box that comes out that says keep only or exclude. And it shows that it's for certificate degrees. So I'm going to keep only. Oh, went away there for a second. Oh, there we go. Keep only. And now we see the number of certificates awarded by year in descending order. And this is where you could have that person do it on their own, or you do it for them. You just download it into a PowerPoint, send it out to them, download it into PDF, and it's there. So we're trying to make life easier for folks, especially when requests come in, because we're very well acquainted with requests coming into our side, and so we're trying to help you on your side when it comes to regional work. Okay. So now let's say you want to take it back to where it was. Oh, well, how do you do that? You can either be like Homer Simpson and just say like, well, it was like that when I got here, so someone else has to fix it. If you're on a Windows environment, here's how you fix that. You do Control-Z, that keystroke, and it'll undo. If you're on a Mac environment, you do Command-Z, and it'll take it back. And see, it'll start taking it back. And that keystroke will be smart enough to remember to take you all the way back, okay? So if you go too far back and you're like, oh, I went too far back, what do I do? Well, you can just go ahead and play around with the filters, or if you close out the window or refresh it and come back into the data, it'll go back to the default, and which in this case, I think it's Gulf Coast. In the regional targets overview, it's Upper East. So you have different ways of getting around that. You're not stuck. The view that you're seeing is only for yourselves. So you're not hitting any live data, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so I hope that this easy to start guide was helpful. You can have some more time to play around with it. And I think we have another poll for you guys to do. Unless there are any other questions. Did I miss any?
So I didn't see any questions in the chat. Does anybody have any other questions about the dashboards? We're running kind of short on time, so I think we might skip the extra poll and sort of move forward without, giving you a chance to play with the completion credentials, the institutional completions dashboard. However, as I said earlier, the link will remain active, but please note this may not be the permanent place that this lives. When we're ready to officially roll out the dashboards, we will send communication to all the institutions and let you guys know that they have been made available. And at that point, if we change the link for some reason, that would also be made clear there. In the meantime, I definitely encourage you to play with them on your own and let Luis or I know if you have any questions or any thoughts as you continue to look through them.
Okay, then I'll go ahead and stop sharing then. Unless you want me to keep the window up, Elizabeth.
You can stop sharing, that's fine.
Okay.
So now, if you guys have any other general questions related to the regional stuff, I would encourage you to pop those in chat. And as you're trying to think of questions, if you didn't pre-plan any, there's a couple of topics that I just wanted to go ahead and cover that I thought would be on the minds of our regional folks. So the first thing, I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware that we have an active COVID-19 webpage for the coordinating board. So as you all know and are all experiencing, right, we've had a lot of shifts and changes in how we do business as normal for higher ed as the result of COVID-19. And we just want to make sure that you're aware that the coordinating board is trying to be responsive to your needs and to your questions. And part of what we've done then is create this website that I just popped into the chat for you all, if you're not familiar with it, that sort of gives you, here's what the latest COVID news is from the governor's office and from our perspective. But what's of particular use to institutions is there's a series of facts and questions that we've created related to career and technical education, courses, calendars, and reporting, general FAQs, PERK and grant FAQs, and others. And basically these have been formed based on questions we have been getting from you all in the field. So if you have questions related to COVID, please contact us. We will make sure they get passed on to the right people. We have a group, a committee that's meeting regularly to assess the COVID-19 situation and assess adjustments that we need to make in terms of reporting and things like that. As of right now, I believe all the information is based up through spring and summer. However, we are working on putting out some new recommendations concerning fall, because just as we all know, nobody has a magic ball. We don't know what's going to happen. So we want to make sure that we're being responsive and providing what guidance we can as you plan for your fall semesters. So if you have questions arise, please let us know. Those will, if they apply to all institutions, they'll become part of the FAQs. If it's really more institutional specific, excuse me, then we'll get back with you directly to let you know what the follow-up on that is. As you may know, we've already made some reporting adjustments concerning spring reporting and summer reporting in relation to some items. I know in spring specifically there was some concern about reporting of incompletes and how that might work. It hasn't been a huge portion in the past, but I know there was concern it may be with everything that's happened. So please just look there for guidance, and as usual, continue to pay attention to communications we send out concerning reporting and calendars and other academic information. So if you haven't been there, I encourage you to take a look. The other thing that I thought may be on people's minds is typically this time of year, we do 2 surveys. We do the Regional Action Plan survey and the Institutional Supplement survey. So the Regional Action Plan is where we ask you to take stock sort of what has your regional advisory group done? What do you have planned moving forward? And then the Institutional Supplement is sort of about, hey, can you address changes that have happened? You know, what do you think your success is due to? How knowledgeable are your stakeholders in your institution about 60 by 30 efforts, and those sorts of things. So obviously, in light of everything that's been going on right now, we will definitely add some questions that look at how you think COVID-19 is impacting what has happened and your planning moving forward. But one of the things I would like to know from you all is, we typically have these due August 31st. Does August 31st still make sense for your institutions for the deadlines of both the regional action plan done by your group and the individual institutional surveys? So please feel free to unmute yourself and add your thoughts on whether you think we should stick with the August 31 deadline.
Elizabeth, I don't think the deadline is necessarily going to change a lot. Does that make any sense? Because for our region, depending on what role you serve, some of it is obviously a little busier than others, right? So if you're VP of instruction and you're trying to figure out, you know, what are we going to do? I think the other thing is we move to see if the next wave comes and if institutions are going to move up their start date. We already may be back in the swing of things. Does that make sense? I would like to add, though, this is not about the deadline. I would like to make it known to the coordinating board that our particular region is not necessarily unique, but it does need to be noted that our students don't have internet access. We serve rural communities. And when I say that, I mean, it's not an option for them. Like there's no internet in some of these small areas. So I think when you're in Austin and looking at the state of Texas, that has to be on your mind, because West Texas is the same, you know, our region butts up to DFW, right? And I mean, you could go anywhere. And I have students in my personal class right now driving to Dairy Queen, sitting out in a parking lot because, you know, they just don't have internet access. So I think that's going to change some of our work as a region as a whole, because we can't service these students like we would. I've shared before in our region, even in Tyler, one of the largest factors to student success is transportation. So now it's not just transportation, it's a matter of they just don't have a, I mean, 49% of our students, we did this in the spring, don't have or want on-campus classes to be successful. So I'm just throwing that out there to you, Elizabeth, because you know Corsicana and you appreciate this area, and it's not whether or not our institution wants to do anything. We can't lay the lines to get rural communities internet access. So that, coupled with no transportation, we have a lot of students that it's not about grit or determination or any of that. It's a matter of it's not possible.
Right.
So I will also add, I'll be interested, I know Kilgore last year, they're not on this call, when we do the regional work, you know, they did the 8-week model. I don't know if anybody else on this call is doing that. And I want to see that data and see what that looks like in our region. So I think some of our conversations as this Upper East are going to move to our priorities have to shift to meet this regional need. I also am anticipating, I don't know, y'all on the call can disagree. We don't have a lot of students. Well, let's start this over. We have a lot of students that want to come to college. It's not reality. They've got to go to work now. So we're waiting to see if that's going to shift down. They've got to, if mom and dad have both lost their job, they're going to work. And so, Kelly, you can disagree with me, but I think there's a lot of these students that are going to be raising and stepping in. So when we look at the actual deadline, I don't think it's the deadline. I think that we as a region are going to have some in-depth Zoom meetings to really talk about, we're all in the same boat in this area. Even in Tyler, there's plenty of dead spots. And so I know that's not necessarily unique to Texas, but it is when you look at Austin and Houston and the resources available. Our homeless population has skyrocketed, you know, all those things. So I would encourage the coordinating board to ask questions, those qualitative questions for institutions. And I'll also say this. I know the CARES money came out, that has helped several of our students, but as far as an institution as a whole, we're going to have to do other initiatives, but we don't necessarily have the funding for that right now. Does that make any sense? Especially if our enrollment goes down. So Kelly, do you want to add anything?
No, I think you hit it, you know, you hit the hammer on the nail, Afton. That's why I always like serving on your team, because you always find the right words to say at the right time. And I would just add to food insecurities. So I serve our off-campus site for A&M Texarkana on Kevin's campus, Northeast Texas Community College. So NTCC was generous enough to let us, our students, go to the parking lot of NTCC and use the internet. But I was telling students, like Afton was, like we all were, go to McDonald's. And I just find it sad in 2020 that I have to tell my student to go to a parking lot to get internet access. And I think this is a bigger issue with the legislator. but I think Afton said it well, but I would also just add to that food insecurities. It was great. So we have a main campus food bank in Texarkana, which is an hour away, but Dr. Clinton and Dr. Rose let us borrow, or not borrow, but our students can use their food bank. And a lot, like Afton said, a lot of our students have lost their jobs, that are parents, that work full time. So I think the food insecurity as well as the internet insecurity is there as well. So, but thank you, Afton, for your comments.
So I hear what you're saying, and I really appreciate all these different factors that you're bringing to light. And that was kind of what we were trying to get at with the point of, does the survey make sense right now, and sort of what changes do we need to make, was in light of, you don't have a crystal ball any more than we do. And you know difficulties that your students are experiencing right now. And so you have to think like, you know, how do we address those moving forward? And we just want to make sure that like we aren't adding to your burden by, you know, enforcing a deadline that doesn't make sense for you to try to start think about, well, what does this mean for us moving forward? Recognizing that what you plan now may look completely different in 6 months, right? Depending on what happens.
But Elizabeth, I will say though, if the coordinating board needs it to get done, we do it. So I would encourage you, right? I always say, Kelly's heard me say this plenty of times, we do 2 things for 2 reasons. 1, an unfunded mandate, or 2, a funded mandate. That's it, right? Money is tied to it. I would love to think, yes, we educate to change students' lives, but to keep the doors open. So with that in mind, the further you push it out, it's not going to make us do any more, any less. Does that make sense? So I would encourage you as the co-board to hold us accountable. That's your job. And I appreciate that. So when I have a deadline, I need to get it done. So I think for our region specifically, we've had a few core people. We've had lots of changes, but we need to be held accountable as a region to answer to you.
To make that planning happen, right?
Yeah, and so I'm saying don't push it back too far, because then, you know, our work isn't, I mean, we continue in our own world.
Right.
But as a whole, it is really nice to work across the region with other great professionals and know that we're not alone. We're not, I mean, for us, the East Texas region, we're all in this together.
Right.
Our students aren't going to Dallas. They're staying here. We do share students. Trinity Valley, I mean, all of us share students, if you will. And so us working together really makes it easier. So I would encourage you not to push it off too far, because then it's everything else and you get too far in the semester. I would also say once iPads opens and you start doing that, or you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
no, I get it. It's that continuous cycle of things.
When you start looking at those, and for us specifically, there was several of us that did it back and forth through email, and it worked well.
Okay.
We will have to retweak quite a bit of that, because it's not going to be feasible.
Right.
So we'll see what happens with that. But so I say hold to your standards there, Elizabeth.
Okay, thank you so much for that feedback. So there's a couple of, I want to be mindful of our time, and there's a couple other things I just want to hit quickly. Which sort of ties into what we've been talking about is, for those of you familiar with the plan, you know, we've been talking about all along is 2020 as sort of a key point to reassess targets and think about how the plan is moving forward. And with everything that's going on, leadership at the coordinating board is looking at the plan. And if there are changes, that obviously will circulate down to our regional efforts. But for the time being, rather than trying to collect new targets and new projections from institutions who don't know what's happening or where they're going to be, we just want to encourage you to do what you do best, which is stay focused on supporting your students. So right now, it's not about are you meeting that target, it's about are you doing what you can to help your students. And it sounds like you're definitely going above and beyond to try to get them the resources that they need. And it's important that, you know, you're providing us with that feedback in terms of what is it that you need to be able to provide that. So I just wanted to touch base on that to make sure that y'all are we're all in the same place for what we're thinking with that, which is that the student is the #1 focus right now. And we will be thinking about these other things as we move forward and have a better sense of what our new normal is going to look like for higher education. On that note, Rachel shared an exit ticket with you where she collected information specifically on the equity piece, which will help her, and as she mentioned, help us with thinking about our role in continuing equity efforts. I have also sent you an email, and I'm going to pop a link in here for a separate survey from the coordinating board. And I promise we're not just trying to make you do a ton of surveys, but this one asks you sort of generally about the different pieces of the session, but it also has a second piece that asks you about the regional efforts at large. So as all of this is happening, this is an opportunity for us to really think about, you know, what are we doing to best support regional efforts? And so we would appreciate your feedback on that survey. And then that wraps us up, unless anybody has a comment they would like to add before we go. I again want to thank Rachel for her training on equity and for the great conversation and y'all's time and engagement in this session today.
I just want to say thank you to the coordinating board. Thank you, Rachel, Ruby, Elizabeth, John, and Louise. Thank you all.
Okay, and as I said, anything, feel free to reach out to John, reach out to myself, reach out to Louise, Ruby. We'll be happy to do what we can to support your institutions. Thank you so much. You all have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.